Now, South Africa's unemployment problem has worsened in the first quarter of 2021. Joblessness increased by 0.1 percentage points. That's to 32.6%. Youth unemployment is sitting at a staggering 63% and even higher under the expanded definition of joblessness. And it's one of South Africa's most intractable challenges, made worse by COVID-19. Now, prior to the pandemic, the unemployment rate, including people who had given up looking for work, was just sitting under 70%. Now, people, this is between the ages of 15 and 24 years old. Let's discuss this now with the professor at Johannesburg, Professor Lauren Graham. She's Director of Social Development at that institution. Prof, a very good morning to you. Thank you very much for your time. The 74% unemployment rate, is that the expanded definition? And what ages are we talking specifically here?
Yes, and thanks very much for having me on your show. So we're looking at 74.7% for 15 to 24-year-olds, and that is our broad definition of youth unemployment, so it does include discouraged work seekers. But we do think that that's an important indicator to track, because we really don't want the earliest entrants into the labour market to be discouraged already. But over the past couple of years, we have seen increases in our discouragement rate amongst even the youngest work seekers, and we're seeing that even more so in the latest statistics. All
right. So we know that government has been very vocal, and to an extent, it actually has also been dirtying its hands, so to speak, to try and get this problem resolved, the issue of youth unemployment. I want to quickly talk about that so that we get to the solutions. So in terms of government interventions, what has been done thus far, and has it worked?
So I think you're absolutely right. There's been a huge amount of investment in trying to address this challenge over many, many years. But youth unemployment generally is a really complex issue, and so there is no one single bullet that's going to change the situation. What we have seen is that in periods of economic growth, we have seen a reduction in youth unemployment figures. So in 2006 to 2008 was the time where we did see a reduction in youth unemployment. But we need to see more of that. But what complicates it is that not all economic growth leads to job growth. Even in periods of economic growth, we've seen low job growth. And so targeting industries and sectors where we're going to see higher rates of job growth would be an important strategy. So sectors like tourism, for example, which has been really hard hit with the COVID scenario. But beyond that, if we move to supply side, it's not just about the demand side. We know that young people tend to get locked out of the labour market. And so focusing on issues like skills training, helping young people with intermediation. So we've got a very inefficient labour market in terms of matching work seekers with employers, for instance. How do we get young people closer to employers? And there's been a lot of investment in that. We've got a big ESSA database, the Employment Services South Africa, which is run through the Department of Employment and Labour. The NYDA runs a similar one. Those perhaps have not been as effective as they could be. And part of that is because there's, a lot of young people don't know about those services and don't know where to go to access those services. And we also see that young people go in and out of employment and training opportunities. So they're staggering in and out of employment and training, which has really negative effects on a young person's mental health. It can contribute to the discouragement. And so we need to be focusing on some of those solutions that really target that discouragement, that increasing discouragement that we're seeing amongst young people. But yes, a huge amount of resources spent on youth unemployment.
In the article, Professor, that you wrote alongside two other professors, you question whether youth employment programs have been successful in trying to answer or deal with this issue of unemployment? Let's start by answering that question first. Have these been successful? At the top of mind, immediately, I have the NYDA, the National Youth Development Agency. I have the YES initiative. I think that's the Youth Employment Service that I think was started under the current president. Have any of these initiatives really come to the help or come to the rescue of young people?
So it's really difficult to give a blanket answer to that, because all of these programs approach youth unemployment with different, addressing different aspects of youth unemployment. What we can say is, on aggregate, when we look at programs that bring employers and young people together, so things like learnerships, internships, programs that have a matching component that train young people based on what employers are looking for, we do see that those are more successful than a range of other programs that simply train without that connection with young people. So that's certainly a plus. And that's the kind of work that many of these organizations, so a lot of private sector organizations, are in fact doing their own training, where they're bringing young people in and training them through learnerships and other programs. So those are really, really important. What we're also seeing is that where organizations are trying to close the gap, the intermediation gap, so that's where we're bringing employers and employees together, even if we're not doing training, those are also showing a lot of promise. So simply working with young people who are accessing labor centers, for instance, and helping them to improve their CVs, we're starting to see some positive benefits of those kinds of programs. So the more we understand about what works, the more we understand how complex this issue is. But one of the key arguments we make in that article is that if we can't only evaluate programs based on whether they get a young person into a job, for two reasons. One is we're facing structural unemployment, and in a context of COVID, there's fewer and fewer jobs for young persons to be placed in. Yeah. But also, if we're only looking at that job, we might get a young person into a job, and 3 months later, because it's a short-term contract, they're out of the job and we're back to square one. So what are the other things that programs are doing well? And we argue that indicators like, are you improving a young person's self-efficacy? Are you improving a young person's job search resilience and their capabilities to look for work? Those are equally important indicators to be building in young people in contexts of high youth unemployment and structural unemployment that we're seeing, but which we're going to be seeing in a number of other countries in the world as well.
No, Prof, you've dealt successfully with what I was going to ask of you, which is the solutions to this. All right, so perhaps when we wrap up our conversation, I want to talk about what you also looked at in that article, and that is that unemployment in South Africa is caused by the structure of the economy. Simplify that for us.
So, if I can simplify it, it is obviously complex, but essentially what we're looking at is that we've had historically, our economy has been underpinned by the primary sectors, mining, agriculture, for instance. And what we've seen in recent years is much more of an emphasis on the tertiary sectors, so tourism, business process outsourcing, financial services, for instance. And typically those industries, not all of them, but a lot of those industries require higher levels of skills. So if you think about business process outsourcing or financial services, they require higher levels of skills that our current education system is simply not delivering. And so there's two sides to this. One is to be ensuring that we're constantly shifting our education system to be producing those skills, but also looking at the industries that can absorb larger numbers of young people and people generally that might not have those higher levels of skills, that might not have accessed post-secondary education and training, for instance. And so looking at sectors like manufacturing, the tourism industry, and really a sector-specific focus that can really unlock job opportunities that don't require higher levels of skills, but that allow people entry into the labor market and they can build up through the labor market is going to be crucial.
Professor Lauren Graham, thank you very much for your time. Director of Social Development at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you very much for your insights here.